My hands were wrapped around my father's wrists, counting his repetitions out loud the way his physical therapist had shown me, when my phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He was having a good morning. His hands weren't shaking as badly, and he'd already eaten a full breakfast without me asking twice. I was in the middle of saying 7, 8, good, Dad, keep going, when his eyes drifted to my phone screen. You going to get that? He asked. After we finish, I said, 2 more. He smiled and pushed through the last 2 reps, and I steadied his hands when he was done, the way I always did, waiting for the tremor to settle. Then I walked over and picked up my phone. The notification was a text from my brother. It was short, just 1 line. Agent confirmed Saturday showing. Dad doesn't know. Don't forget to call him Thursday so he doesn't accidentally say anything to Jay. He had sent it to me. I set the phone face down on the counter. My father was watching me from across the kitchen, head tilted slightly, already forgetting he'd asked about the text. You want some coffee? I asked him. Sure, sweetheart, he said. I turned around and filled his mug. My hands were completely steady. Because I had filed the emergency conservatorship paperwork on Monday, 4 days ago, and a judge had already signed it Tuesday morning. I want to tell you what kind of man my father is, because it matters. He is the kind of man who still keeps a framed photo of my mother on the nightstand, even though she's been gone for 2 years. He is the kind of man who learned to make her cornbread recipe after she passed, because he said the house smelled wrong without it. He coached my brother's Little League team for 7 seasons. He drove me 45 minutes each way to violin lessons every Saturday for 4 years. Always waited in the parking lot reading paperbacks. Never complained once. He is a retired electrician with a bad left knee and a laugh that fills a room and early Parkinson's disease that his neurologist diagnosed 14 months ago. On good days, the tremor is barely noticeable. On bad days, he can't button his own shirt. The cognitive symptoms come and go. Most mornings, he is completely himself. Some afternoons, he gets confused about timelines, mixes up what happened yesterday with what happened 10 years ago. He is not helpless, but he is vulnerable, and the people closest to him knew exactly how to use that. My brother is 6 years older than me. Growing up, he was the one our parents bragged about, the one who got the better bedroom, the one who was forgiven first after every fight. I don't say that with bitterness anymore, just as a fact. When my mother got sick 3 years ago, it was me who drove down from Nashville every other weekend to help with appointments and grocery runs and the mountain of paperwork that came with a serious illness. My brother sent cards. He called on holidays. He said the drive was too long, that his job was demanding, that his wife needed him home on weekends. When my mother passed, my father sold their old house in Clarksville and moved into a smaller place in Brentwood, closer to me. It was a smart decision. A modest brick ranch on a corner lot, paid off entirely, worth somewhere around $420,000 in the current market. Everything my father had left in the world was in that house and in a savings account he'd been adding to since 1987. For about 6 months after the move, things were quiet. I visited twice a week. I helped him set up automatic bill pay. I organized his medications into a weekly pill organizer and left notes on the fridge. I brought him to his neurology appointments and sat in the room while the doctor talked and took my own notes because my father sometimes couldn't remember what was said by the time we got to the car. I work as a paralegal at a family law firm in Nashville. I know what documents look like. I know what coercion looks like. I know exactly what a family can do to a vulnerable person when they think no one is paying attention. My brother and his wife started coming around more in January. That was the first thing I noticed. They had always been distant, 2 hours away in Memphis, plenty of excuses. Then suddenly they were making the drive almost every weekend. They brought groceries. They took my father to lunch. They were warm and present in a way I hadn't seen in years, and I told myself I should be grateful. Maybe they had just finally stepped up. Maybe grief had changed them. But I kept noticing small things. My brother started sitting at the kitchen table with my father after dinner, papers spread out between them, the conversation going quiet when I walked into the room. The first time, I asked what they were working on, and my brother said they were just going over some insurance stuff, nothing important. My father nodded vaguely in agreement. The second time, there were no papers on the table at all, just 2 coffee mugs, and my brother changed the subject so fast I barely registered it. My sister-in-law started asking questions that I can only describe as strategic. Were the neighbors close? Did my father ever mention if any friends still borrowed tools from the garage? Did he know what his property tax assessment was this year? I answered them when I could, but afterward I'd feel a low-grade unease that I couldn't quite name. The thing that finally broke it open was a business card I found tucked behind the fruit bowl. It was for a real estate agent in Franklin. I turned it over. Someone had written on the back in handwriting that wasn't my father's. W. D in kitchen. Original hardwoods. Ask about comp on Alderton. I stood in my father's kitchen for a long time holding that card. Then I asked him, as casually as I could, whether any real estate agents had been by lately. He thought about it, face scrunched the way it gets when he's reaching for something. He said he thought maybe someone had come with my brother. He said he thought he might have signed some papers about the house, but he wasn't certain, and he said it the way he says things when he's not sure if they're real memories or something he dreamed. I went home that night and I did not sleep. I am a paralegal. I have sat across the table from family members who drained elderly parents' accounts, transferred property under the guise of estate planning, leveraged cognitive decline like a loophole. I have helped attorneys untangle those situations. I have seen what happens when someone moves too fast, before the documentation is in place, before anyone is positioned to push back. You lose. Every time. So I did not call my brother. I did not confront my sister-in-law. I did not say a word to my father about what I suspected, because he would only worry and then forget and then worry again, and because the conversation might get back to them before I was ready. I went to work the next morning, sat down with the elder law attorney in the office next to mine, and I started building a case. It took 3 weeks. I pulled the county property records and found it on the 3rd day. A deed transfer, signed 6 weeks earlier, quietly filed with the Register of Deeds. My father's name off the title, my brother's name added. A quitclaim deed, the kind used between family members to avoid certain taxes, the kind that requires almost no scrutiny if nobody objects. My father's signature was on it, shaky, imprecise. The notary stamp was from a UPS store in Memphis. The attorney I worked with explained it clearly. The deed was legally recorded, but a recorded deed is not necessarily a valid one. If we could demonstrate that my father lacked the cognitive capacity to understand what he was signing, or that he signed under undue influence, we could contest it. We needed medical documentation, witness testimony if possible, and we needed to move quickly before the house went to market and title passed to a buyer. We filed for emergency guardianship and conservatorship on a Monday. My father's neurologist provided a letter within 48 hours. The judge reviewed everything and signed the order Tuesday morning. As of that Tuesday, I was my father's legal guardian and conservator. No financial decision involving him could be made without my authorization. Any sale of his property would require court approval. Then I called the bank. My father had a joint savings account that my mother had originally set up with him. After she passed, my brother's name had been quietly added to it. I didn't know when. My father, when I asked gently, said he thought my brother had mentioned something about convenience, about being able to help if something happened. There was just over $98,000 in that account. Working with the conservatorship order, I transferred the full amount to a new protected account with only my name and my father's on it. I left the old account open with a 0 balance. And then I went to my father's house on Thursday morning and helped him with his physical therapy exercises because that is what I do every Thursday morning. And I waited. The text came in just before 10. My brother had meant to send it to his wife. He had sent it to me instead. One line, about the Saturday showing, about making sure my father didn't mention anything to Jay. Jay, which is what my family has called me my entire life, the shortened version of my name that only people close to me use. I set the phone down and got my father his coffee. I let Saturday come and go without a word. I imagine the real estate agent knocked on the door and got no answer. I imagine my brother called the agent, called the house, eventually called my father's cell phone. My father and I were at the farmer's market that Saturday morning, and then we had lunch at his favorite diner, and then I sat with him in the backyard while he watched the cardinals come and go at the bird feeder my mother had hung from the oak tree the spring before she died. It was a genuinely nice afternoon. My father was lucid and warm, and he told me a story about coaching my brother's team I had heard before but didn't say so. My phone rang 12 times that day. I answered none of them. Sunday evening I answered. My brother's voice was tight in a way I recognized from childhood. That particular register he reaches when something has gone wrong and he is trying to decide whether to be angry or conciliatory. He asked if everything was okay. He said he'd been trying to reach me. He said there was apparently some kind of issue with Dad's paperwork and he just wanted to clear it up. What kind of paperwork? I asked. A pause. Just some estate planning stuff. Nothing dramatic. But apparently there's a hold on the account, and we need to figure out who filed what. I filed it, I said. You filed what? The conservatorship. I'm Dad's legal guardian now. Financial decisions go through me and through the court. The pause this time was longer. You had no right to do that. he said, and the conciliatory register was gone. I had every right. I have documentation of a quitclaim deed that Dad signed while his neurologist has documented cognitive impairment. I have a notarized transfer that bypassed any independent legal counsel. I have a UPS store notary stamp and a signature that does not match his current motor function assessments. I kept my voice very even. I also have the bank records showing his savings account balance before and after your name was added. That was for his protection, he said, in case of an emergency. The account is now at 0, I said. So if there's an emergency, you're welcome to cover it. He did not say anything for a moment. Then his wife's voice came on, and she was not quiet or measured the way my brother had tried to be. She said, I had no idea what I was doing. She said I was going to destroy the family. She said they had put in time and effort, and they deserved something for all of it. And my father had agreed. He had understood. And if I thought I was going to paint them as criminals just because I was jealous and territorial, then I was going to find out what a real legal fight looked like. I let her finish. Tell me exactly what time and effort you're referring to, I said, because I have calendars. I have the appointment records from Dad's neurologist and his physical therapist and his cardiologist. I have the grocery receipts. I have the medication logs. I want to know which of those things you contributed to, because I'd love for a judge to see that comparison laid out clearly. Another silence, different this time. You don't want to do this, my brother said finally. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just waiting for you to explain to a probate court why Dad signed a quitclaim deed on his primary residence at a UPS store without independent counsel while actively under neurological care. I heard him exhale. I heard his wife say something low and sharp in the background. I heard my brother say, quietly, I'll call you back. He didn't call back. He showed up. They drove from Memphis on a Wednesday morning, 2 weeks after that phone call, and they arrived at my father's house while I was working from the kitchen table. My father answered the door himself. He smiled when he saw them, asked if they wanted coffee, shuffled toward the kitchen in his slippers. He did not know what was happening. I had made a deliberate decision not to tell him in detail, only that I was helping make sure his house and his money were safe. He had nodded and said, You were always the careful one, and gone back to watching the History Channel. My brother sat down at the kitchen table across from me. His wife stood near the door. He looked tired. He looked the way people look when they have spent 2 weeks talking to lawyers and finding out that the position they are in is exactly as bad as they feared. I want to talk about this reasonably, he said. That's what we're doing, I said. He started with the version where he was trying to help. They had just wanted to be involved. They had been worried about me burning out as the sole caregiver. The deed transfer was meant to ensure my father's assets were protected in a way that benefited the family. The bank account was for emergencies. None of it was what it looked like. I let him finish. Then I opened the folder I had kept on the table and I laid out the documents one at a time. The deed. The bank transfer history with the timing annotated. The real estate agent's card with the handwritten notes. A printout of the listing inquiry my sister-in-law had submitted to the agent in January, 3 months before they had filed the deed, which I had obtained through a legal records request. The inquiry listed the property address and estimated a listing timeline of early spring. You were planning the sale before you ever filed the deed, I said. That's premeditation. That's not a misunderstanding about estate planning. My sister-in-law started to say something, and my brother put his hand up. He looked at the documents for a long time. What happened in that kitchen in the weeks and months that followed is complicated the way these things always are when it is your own family. There were attorneys. There were mediated conversations that were exhausting and ugly. There were moments when my brother cried in a way I had not seen since we were children, and I felt the complicated grief of loving someone who has done something you cannot excuse. The deed was set aside. The probate court reviewed the circumstances, the timing, the medical documentation, and agreed that the transfer did not meet the standard of informed consent given my father's documented cognitive state. The title returned to my father's name, under the conservatorship. My brother and his wife did not face criminal charges. The elder law attorney explained that criminal prosecution in these cases requires a very high bar of intent that is genuinely hard to prove in family situations, and that civil remedies were more reliable and more likely to produce a real outcome. The outcome we got was this: a formal court agreement, enforceable, that my brother signed. He surrendered any claim to my father's property or accounts during his lifetime. He agreed to a structured repayment plan for the documented withdrawals from the savings account in the months before I had frozen it, totaling just over $11,000. He was permitted to visit my father, supervised initially, with conditions that could be relaxed if the visits remained appropriate. My sister-in-law was not part of any of the permitted visits for the first 6 months. That was my father's choice, not mine. When I finally sat him down and explained what had happened in terms he could follow on a good day, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I wondered why they were being so nice all of a sudden. He said it without anger, just a kind of tired clarity, the lucid version of something he had felt without being able to name. He said he didn't want her in his house for a while. I told him that was completely his right. I want to talk about the parts of this that no one tells you about, because the comments I imagine people leaving on a story like this are always about the justice, the karma, the satisfying moment when the scheme falls apart. And yes, those things happened. There was a Tuesday morning after the conservatorship was signed when I sat in my car in the parking garage at work and cried from sheer relief, the kind of crying that feels like putting something very heavy down. There was the call from the county recorder confirming the deed reversal that I replayed 3 times. There was a moment on the phone with my brother after everything was settled where he said, quietly, that he knew he had done something wrong, and I believed him, and I didn't know what to do with that. Because here is the part that is not satisfying. I spent the better part of 4 months terrified. I second-guessed myself constantly. I am not a litigating attorney. I am a paralegal who knows enough to understand what the documents mean, but not always enough to know what would happen in court. I went to my father's house twice a week and made his coffee and counted his repetitions and kept my voice normal while carrying a level of fear and grief that I had nowhere to put. Some nights I called my best friend and just talked in circles for an hour. Not about facts, just about the feeling of being the person in the family who has to absorb everything while pretending everything is fine. There is also no version of this where my brother becomes a different person. He is still my brother. He sat at my parents' dinner table every Christmas of my childhood. He taught me to ride a bike in the driveway on a July afternoon when I was 6 years old, and he was 12, and he had infinite patience for something I can only now appreciate. Whatever he became, or whatever he revealed himself to be, does not erase any of that. It just adds a layer of grief to a grief I was already carrying. But I also know what would have happened if I had done nothing. I know the timeline. The house would have gone to market in April. With early spring demand, it likely would have sold at or above asking within 30 days. My father would have been moved into whatever facility fit the budget my brother and his wife had decided on, managed from Memphis, visited rarely. The savings account would have been empty. The physical therapy appointments would have been cut. The neurologist visits would have been spaced further and further apart because the money for the copays would be gone. My father, who still keeps my mother's photo on his nightstand, who still makes her cornbread because the house smells wrong without it, would have spent his last years in a room that no one chose with him, with a care level determined by what was left after someone else took what they thought they deserved. I did not let that happen. My father is still in the house on the corner lot in Brentwood. The oak tree in the backyard still has my mother's bird feeder hanging from it, and on good mornings he sits out there with his coffee and watches the cardinals. He has a home health aide who comes 3 mornings a week, paid for through his properly managed savings and the conservatorship budget I review with the court annually. I visit twice a week. I count his repetitions out loud. I bring him the kind of diner coffee he likes because the pod machine I got him never makes it right. Last month, he had a particularly good week. The kind where his timing is sharp and his stories are vivid and he is so entirely himself that it almost tricks you into forgetting what's coming. We were sitting at the kitchen table after lunch and he looked at me for a long moment, the way he does sometimes, like he's seeing me clearly and wants to make sure I know it. You've always been the careful one, he said again. I learned it from you, I said. He made a face like he wasn't sure he believed me. Then he laughed, and the sound of it filled the kitchen the way it always has, the way it will keep filling rooms for as long as he is able, because I made sure of it. Some people believe that blood makes family. I used to believe that too. I held on to it longer than I should have, the way you hold on to a belief that keeps costing you, because letting go of it feels like losing something more than what you're losing. But I learned something in those 4 months that I will not unlearn. Blood is just a starting point. What family actually is, the real thing, the kind that holds, is made of showing up. It is made of counting the repetitions. It is made of sitting in parking lots of neurologist offices and taking notes because you know the details will matter. It is made of choosing the person in front of you, again and again, even when it is exhausting, even when no one is watching, even when the people who should be helping you carry it have decided that the wait is not worth their time. My father is worth my time. He has always been worth my time. And if there is one thing I would say to anyone listening who is the careful one, the responsible one, the one who absorbs what everyone else refuses to hold, it is this. Being the one who shows up does not mean being the one who gets taken advantage of. You are allowed to protect yourself while you protect the people you love. You are allowed to build the documentation and make the calls and file the paperwork and set the trap, because sometimes love looks exactly like that. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone you love be consumed by the people who were supposed to love them back. The cardinals still come to the feeder in the backyard. My father still watches them every morning he is able. That is everything. That is enough.